HHV6 antibody levels in patients with a greater risk and family history of Alzheimer's disease versus patients with no risk and no family history. Alzheimer's disease is the sixth leading cause of death in the United States. Between 2000 and 2015, deaths from Alzheimer's disease have increased by 123%. 1 in 3 seniors dies with Alzheimer's disease, and 5.7 million Americans are living with the disease. Every 65 seconds, someone in the United States develops the disease. Between 2000 and 2015, Alzheimer's disease killed more patients than any type of heart disease did. Alzheimer's disease wasn't always very popular. It started getting more research when the former President Ronald Reagan announced that he had been diagnosed with the disease. Since then, it has gotten more research and more publicity. Some facts about HHV6 is the human herpes virus 6, and it infects nearly 100% of humans. It typically presents itself at the age of 3, and they normally experience symptoms such as like fever and rash, but it establishes the long life latency and can become reactivated later in life. Reactivation can occur in the brain, lungs, heart, and kidneys. Some other viruses of the human herpes virus 6 can appear later in life, in things such as shingles, any fever blisters. But they are widespread throughout the world and are extremely common. The later stage of the infections may indicate a specific immunological mechanism for controlling the invasiveness of the viruses to particular patients. The reactivation in the brain tissue can cause cognitive dysfunction, permanent disability, and death, which has led a lot of researchers to believe that there is a link between Alzheimer's disease and HHV6. Many studies have shown that there is a role played between HHV6 and Alzheimer's disease. It starts with a correlation between HHV6 and the amyloid beta. Amyloid beta is an antimicrobial peptide nature. There is a known correlation between these two, which causes the progression in Alzheimer's disease with the virus. Patients with Alzheimer's disease have higher levels of the human herpes virus 6, and that was first discovered when researchers started studying brains of patients who had passed away with Alzheimer's disease. They also found that the immune system does not fight off the virus as well as patients without Alzheimer's disease, which leads to a lower reactivity level with the patients. The two biggest questions that it's brought up for researchers is, what is the exact correlation between HHV6 and amyloid beta, and is it possible to determine whether a patient will have Alzheimer's just by drawing just simple labs such as the HHV6 antibody levels? Which leads to my proposed research of a survey. A survey could definitely aid in determining the correlation between Alzheimer's disease and the human herpes virus 6. It could also potentially predict the likelihood of patients developing Alzheimer's just based off of the amount of the virus levels they have. And the results can have a high potential to correlate with research that's already been conducted and definitely aid in future research. It could also just aid in early diagnosis and maybe potentially lead to like a vaccine one day once the exact correlation has been determined, but it would definitely aid in the future research. So the survey would be just having 3, categories of people. There would be 25 people in each category with a total of 75 people involved in the experiment. There would be a group of people with a known family history of Alzheimer's disease, a known diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease, and the last group would just be people with no family history, no diagnosis, no high risk. That way we could just compare the lab results and see just the exact differences of the HHV6 levels in each of these patients. There would be some requirements of the survey. Each person would have to sign a consent form just agreeing to be involved in the experiment, and then agree to having their labs drawn and having those results shared. Then each person would have their blood drawn by a phlebotomist, and then each blood specimen would be prepared to be sent to an outside lab. That does require a little bit of work. Once the blood is drawn, it has to be set aside for about 10 minutes to allow the blood to clot. Once it's clotted, each specimen will be put into a centrifuge and spun at 1500 RPM for about 15 minutes, and then this would allow the blood cells to separate from the serum. Once that process is completed, the serum will be aliquoted off and placed into another labeled specimen container, which would be sent for transportation to the outside lab, which would be Quest Lab in Birmingham. The results would be back within usually 3 to 5 business days. Once those labs are back, we would be able to analyze the data. And there are some references. The IgG would show a past infection, while the IgM would show a current infection. And the references are anything less than 1 to 10 titer, which would not detect an antibody. Anything greater or equal to that would have an antibody detected. And then for the IgM, anything less than 1 to 20, there would not be an antibody detected. But anything greater than that, there would be an antibody detected. So the goal of this survey would just be to study, or to perform a survey to study, the different correlations of the antibody levels of patients in Calhoun County. We would study the presence of antibodies versus, the patients who didn't have a higher risk of the Alzheimer's disease, which that would help to confirm the causative agent over a wider geographical area. A survey to detect the human herpes virus 6 antibodies level in each type of patient could definitely have the potential to lead to a better understanding of the association between the viral load and the development of the disease. Future generations would definitely benefit from this. It would aid in future research and have a higher impact on determining the direct correlation between the human herpes virus 6 and the amyloid beta, which would ultimately lead to the determination of the correlation between the virus and Alzheimer's disease.